The air within the arrival hall consistently bore the same olfactory signature. A sterile, metallic sharpness mingled with the delicate, almost sickeningly sweet aroma of lilies. An olfactory herald of beginnings that resonated unervingly with the finality of an ending. Elias stood poised behind the thick, soundproof glass of the viewing gallery, his knuckles stark white as he maintained a tight grip on the railing. Below, within the clinically white chamber, the procedure had commenced. A low-frequency hum vibrated through the very structure of the floor, a sound that resonated deep within one's bones, a resonant frequency that served as both the world's inaugural lullaby and its ultimate lament. A soft, shimmering luminescence began to coalesce in the room's center, akin to heat haze shimmering above a summer road. This light intensified, pulsed rhythmically, and slowly, with agonizing deliberation, began to assume a human form. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic percussive rhythm against the chamber's steady, indifferent hum. He was 42 years of age, ostensibly in the zenith of his existence. His physical form was a finely tuned machine, his intellect a vast repository of experiences, a veritable fortress of meticulously curated knowledge. Yet, on this particular day, he felt as fragile as the man currently materializing from the light. An elderly man, stooped and emaciated, his skin resembling crumpled parchment, possessed a bewildered expression in his watery, pale blue eyes. He was clad in the simple, gray tunic characteristic of an arrived individual, his hands trembling visibly as he gazed down upon them, as if they were foreign appendages. Elias experienced a surge of pity, coupled with a profound terror and an unfamiliar, fierce affection that felt akin to a fresh wound. This man, this stranger bearing the visage of a nonagenarian, was in fact his son. The light gradually dissipated. The humming ceased entirely. The ensuing silence was absolute, punctuated only by the old man's shuddering breath. Medical technicians, their movements silent due to their soft-soled shoes, entered the chamber with gentle, practiced precision. They spoke in hushed, soothing tones, gently guiding the man toward a chair, meticulously checking his vital signs, and offering him a glass of water, which he struggled to hold steady. Elias observed his own breath caught within his throat. He had previously experienced this scenario 20 years prior when Maya had arrived. He had then been a younger man of 62, his own physical form commencing its slow, inexorable journey toward strength, yet his mind was already a vast repository of decades of accumulated knowledge. He had gazed upon the elderly woman who was his daughter and had experienced a profound sense of duty. However, this particular instance, this felt distinctly different. At 42, he was at the very apex of his existence. He was ostensibly meant to be building a life, not embarking on a new, slow-motion farewell. His wife, Lena, gently squeezed his hand. Her touch served as a reassuring anchor amidst the swirling sea of his emotions. She was 45 years old, her face bearing the faint, yet beautiful, lines indicative of a life lived with grace, lines that were gradually smoothing out with each passing year. "He has your eyes, Elias," she whispered, her voice thick with the weight of unshed tears. Elias gazed once more past the cataracts and the palpable confusion and discerned it. The identical shade of deep, stormy gray that stared back at him from his reflection each morning. It was a cruel, yet undeniably beautiful, detail, a genetic echo spanning an impossible gulf of time. They referred to it as the unwinding, a poetic euphemism for a profoundly brutal reality. One arrived in advanced age, a blank slate inhabiting a failing physical form. One's mind a tabula rasa, equipped solely with the rudimentary instincts for survival and linguistic comprehension. One's family, paradoxically younger, would assume responsibility. They would impart one's own history, reading aloud one's life story from the legacy journals they had meticulously prepared. They would provide care as one's physical form gradually mended, as one grew stronger and more vibrant, shedding age in a manner analogous to a serpent shedding its skin. One would attain a glorious peak of health and intellectual prowess in one's 30s and 40s, the vibrant summer of one's existence. Subsequently, the decline would recommence. One would progressively grow younger, smaller in stature. One's hard-earned knowledge would begin to fray, one's memories simplifying and ultimately dissolving into the ethereal mists of childhood. One would then be cared for by one's own offspring, now adults in their prime. One would attend school, and then kindergarten. Finally, one would regress to infancy, the great forgetting before simply fading away. A peaceful, silent disappearance from the world. A life lived in reverse, from dusk until dawn. The medical technicians were now escorting his son from the chamber. They would transport him to the integration wing, where he would spend several days acclimatizing before being brought home. Home. The very word sounded foreign. How does one bring home a father who is, in actuality, one's son, a child who bears the visage of one's grandfather? Elias and Lena departed the viewing gallery and proceeded down the long, silent corridor. The walls were adorned with portraits of arrivals spanning generations past, faces etched with the wrinkles of age, all bearing the same expression of profound, heart-rending confusion. A veritable museum of reverse decay. We need to finalize his journal, Lena stated softly, her inherently practical nature serving as a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. We only possess the outlines at present. We must populate the details of the life we have planned for him. The life they had planned. That constituted the tradition. Prior to a child's arrival, the parents would meticulously craft their history. They would fabricate a past for them, a career, recreational pursuits, friendships, triumphs, and failures. A narrative framework to anchor their otherwise empty minds. It was an act of profound love, a gift of identity. Yet, as Elias emerged into the cool evening air, the weight of that task felt utterly crushing. He would be compelled to write tales of a life his son had never experienced. He would describe a wife his son had never encountered, who had faded 3 decades prior. He would create a tapestry of memories that were, in essence, nothing more than beautiful, intricately woven lies. They entered their automobile, the engine emitting a quiet hum within the deepening twilight. Lena was engrossed in a datapad, already perusing a selection of potential names. "What are your thoughts on Adam?" she inquired. "It signifies man, the first man." Elias offered no response. He was fixated on observing the city lights blurring past the window. He noticed a group of teenagers, their physical forms brimming with the awkward exuberance of their 15 years, laughing and shouting. Soon, they would be children once more. He saw a man in his late 50s, walking slowly with the assistance of a cane, his mind sharp and brimming with wisdom, his physical form beginning its inexorable betrayal. Everyone moving in the identical direction, yet each embarking on entirely disparate journeys. The system was ostensibly designed to be merciful. There was no sudden, violent demise, no tragic accidents prematurely truncating life at its peak. There is solely the gentle, predictable slope of the unwinding. One bid farewell over decades. One grieved for individuals who were still walking, talking, and laughing. It was a slow, carefully managed sorrow. Yet, on this particular evening, while gazing into the bewildered eyes of his newborn son, Elias experienced no sense of mercy. He felt a profound, cosmic cruelty. He was expected to love this frail, elderly man as his child, to pour his very heart and soul into him, fully cognizant that each day of renewed strength, each moment of reclaimed youth, was merely one additional step toward the day his son would gaze upon him with the blank, unrecognizing eyes of an infant, the memories Elias had so meticulously constructed for him erased irrevocably. Lena gently touched his arm, her brow furrowed with concern. "Elias? What occupies your thoughts?" He turned to face her, the city lights reflecting within his haunted eyes. "I was contemplating goodbyes, Lena," he said, his voice barely audible. "We have just welcomed our son into the world." And simultaneously, in the very same breath, We have initiated the longest goodbye imaginable." She possessed no rejoinder to that pronouncement. She merely held his hand more tightly as they drove toward their residence, a structure poised to become both a sanctuary and a prison, a place of profound love and anticipatory grief. As they entered their driveway, a light illuminated within an upstairs window. It was the room of his father, Samuel, a vibrant 25-year-old who possessed only fleeting recollections of being Elias's parent. Another farewell, already inexorably in progress. And as Elias gazed upon his home, a singular, terrifying question began to bloom within the silence of his mind. How does one construct a future when one's own past is poised to erase one? And how can one pour one's soul into a love that is designed, from its very inception, to be forgotten? The morning sun, thin and pale as watered-down milk, streamed into the kitchen. It illuminated the dust motes dancing suspended within the air, each one a tiny, forgotten universe. For Elias, mornings constituted a ritual of reverse chronology. He commenced with the eldest. Maya, his daughter, was 78 years of age. Her arrival 20 years prior was a memory that was both acutely sharp and distantly remote for Elias. He had been 62, his own joints aching with the phantom pains of an age he was steadily relinquishing. Now he was the strong one. He entered her room, a space permeated with the scents of lavender and aged paper. She was seated adjacent to the window, a thick blanket pulled around her withered frame, her gaze lost within the branches of the ancient oak tree outside. "Good morning, Maya," Elias said softly, his voice gentle, in the manner one employs when addressing a frightened bird. She turned her head slowly, her eyes, clouded by the mists of her 98 years of physical existence, struggling to achieve focus. "Elias," she breathed, a fleeting glimmer of recognition appearing within their depths. "I was just remembering. The sunlight. It reminded me of the park near the old university. We used to stroll there, didn't we? Your mother and I." Elias's heart experienced a painful twist. Maya's mother, Elara, had faded over a decade prior. Maya was referencing a memory culled from her journal, a story Elias himself had crafted for her, a fiction to which she now clung as truth. "Yes, we did," he lied, his voice smooth and reassuring. "You adored the rose garden." He assisted her to her feet, his strong arms easily supporting her meager weight. Her physical form was a fragile cage of bones, yet with each passing month, a subtle transformation was occurring. A slight increase in flesh on her arms, a touch more color in her cheeks. The unwinding was a slow, relentless spring. Her physical form was healing, preparing for a youth she would possess no memory of her adulthood to appreciate. He assisted her with her morning regimen, the nutrient supplements, the gentle physiotherapy. It was a slow, meticulous process, a daily act of devotion to a person who was simultaneously his progeny and his ward. Next, he would check on Samuel, his father. Samuel's chamber resided on the far side of the residence, and the stark contrast induced a sensation akin to temporal whiplash. Music, both loud and audacious, throbbed from within the confines of the closed portal. Elias rapped upon the door. "Sam." The portal swung inward with sudden force. Samuel stood there, a veritable vortex of youthful dynamism. At the age of 25, his appearance was strikingly handsome. His physique was slender yet robust. His eyes possessed a keen and unwavering gaze, and the lingering vestiges of aged wisdom had been supplanted by the fervent immediacy of youth. Upon his arm was a tattoo depicting a spiraling serpent, a recent acquisition against which Elias had endeavored to dissuade him. "It's my skin, Eli," Samuel had retorted, his tone laced with sharpness. "Not yours to cure it." "Good morrow," Elias uttered, compelling a smile to grace his countenance. "Substantial plans for this day?" "Venturing out with Kira," Samuel responded, as he donned a leather jacket. "We might partake in cliff diving at the quarries yonder." Elias's smile constricted. "Sam, that is perilous. Thou art aware that thy corporeal form is still acclimating." Thou art not invulnerable. Samuel rolled his eyes skyward, a gesture emblematic of pure, unadulterated youthful impatience. Verily, the admonishment, I'm not a child, Elias. The irony inherent in the declaration constituted a profound chasm between them. Elias was biologically the child, yet he bore the entirety of the responsibility, the totality of the memory. Samuel was the sire, yet he was shedding that past as one would discard an unwanted garment. I'm cognizant that thou art not, Elias said, his intonation gentler. I recollect, when thou didst instruct me in the art of swimming. Thou wert so meticulous. Thou heldst my head aloft the aqueous expanse, and didst bid me to respect the ocean, not to contend with it. Samuel's visage became devoid of expression for a fleeting instant. The memory had vanished. Elias could discern it within his eyes, the faint flicker of bewilderment, the exertion to grasp a phantom. Ah, well, he mumbled, averting his gaze. I suppose I was a disparate person then. He clapped Elias upon the shoulder, a gesture intended to be reassuring, yet it felt akin to a dismissal. Await me not. He bounded down the stairs, the front portal slamming shut behind him, leaving Elias standing in the echoing silence of the hallway. He was indeed a disparate person. Such was the simple, devastating verity. The sagacious, patient man who had nurtured Elias, who had imparted to him philosophy and carpentry and the means to mend a fractured heart, had departed. In his stead was this vibrant, reckless stranger who bore his visage. This constituted the architecture of their world, an existence erected upon the scaffolding of forgetting. One expended the initial moiety of one's life as a student, assimilating one's own fabricated past. One became a historian of one's own self. Subsequently, one expended the latter moiety as a curator, tending to the fading recollections of one's cherished ones. Love was an act of perpetual, agonizing translation, transmuting the person they once were into the person they are, and lamenting the discrepancy. Elias ultimately made his way toward his study. This chamber was his sanctuary. Books adorned the walls, not merely narratives, but legacy journals originating from his own progenitors. He functioned as a memory archivist for the city, a vocation that was as sacrosanct as it was sorrowful. His duty entailed the digitization and preservation of the journals, to ensure that the fictional histories of generations were not lost. He labored with fading ink, fragile paper, and corrupted data files, a warrior engaged in a losing skirmish against entropy. He seated himself at his desk and surveyed the blank journal intended for his new son, Adam. He would be compelled to commence writing anon. He would fabricate a childhood in a city that no longer existed, a career as an astronomer who charted distant, extinct stars. He would chronicle a great love, a woman named Lyra, and the heartbreak engendered by her fading. He would construct a palace of beautiful falsehoods, and for the ensuing decades, he and Lena would serve as its devoted custodians. Later that evening, after Maya had fallen into slumber and the residence was tranquil, Lena discovered him still within his study, gazing fixedly at the empty page. She approached him from behind and enfolded her arms around his shoulders, resting her cheek upon his head. Her hair, which was gradually regaining its dark, lustrous sheen, exuded the fragrance of jasmine. It is arduous, is it not? She murmured. The inaugural page. It feels akin to a betrayal, Elias confessed, his voice rough. We are not bestowing upon him a life. We are bestowing upon him a cage, a narrative in which he is ensnared until he is sufficiently young to forget it. Is a world devoid of narratives superior? Lena countered gently. Imagine arriving into naught. No appellation, no history, merely a decaying corporeal form and a terrifying void. We furnish them with an anchor, Elias. We bestow upon them a self to which they may cling as they traverse the great expanse. It is the most benevolent act we can perform. He was cognizant that she spoke truth. Such was the philosophy upon which they were all nurtured. The benevolent falsehood constituted the cornerstone of their civilization. However, the discovery of his own son had fissured that cornerstone, unveiling the hollowness within. He turned in his chair to confront her, clasping her hands within his own. Her hands were smoother than they had been a decade prior, the cartography of wrinkles gradually being effaced. "I hold thee in affection, Lena," he said, the words imbued with an intensely, desperately important quality. "I recollect the day upon which we met. At the midlife gala. Thou wert 60 years of age. Thou wert attired in a silver dress. Thou didst quote Theron's philosophy of unbecoming, and I was captivated." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that caused his heart to ache. "And thou wert 58, feigning interest in hydroponic gardening in order to impress me." I recollect. They maintained each other's gaze, and within that moment, their shared past was a real, tangible entity. A world unto itself, vibrant and replete with light. Yet he could already discern the shadow of the future. The years would transpire. They would become 30, then 20. Would they still recollect this moment? Or would it be merely a faint, instinctual warmth, a sense of familiarity devoid of a source? And subsequently, they would be 10 and 5, and the shared world they had constructed would crumble into dust, and they would be two strangers within adjacent playpens. The love he felt for her was the most voracious entity within his life. However, within their world, what was the half-life of love? How many years would elapse before it decayed into something unrecognizable? "Promise me something," Elias whispered, drawing her closer. "Promise me we shall combat it. We shall inscribe everything, not merely for our progeny, but for ourselves. We shall read to each other each and every day to sustain the memories alive for as long as we are capable." "I promise," Lena said, her voice catching, "for as long as we are capable." However, as he held her, the words resonated within his mind. For as long as we are capable. It was not a pledge of forever. It was an admission of defeat. They were not warriors against the dying of the light. They were merely librarians, cataloging the darkness as it descended. And as he contemplated the blank book upon his desk and the old man slumbering within the sterile chamber at the arrival hall, he felt a chilling premonition. They were all dwelling within a narrative someone else had penned, a grand, cosmic narrative of unwinding and forgetting. But what if the narrative was not veracious? What if the architecture of their world, this entire system of managed sorrow, was erected upon a foundation far more complex and terrifying than a simple, benevolent falsehood? Elias's dreams were a tangled morass of temporality. He dreamt of cradling his son, Adam, a diminutive infant, only to witness him wither into an aged man within his arms, his baby's cry transforming into a rattling death cough. He dreamt of his father, Samuel, not as the reckless youth he was currently, but as the sagacious 70-year-old he had been when Elias was a boy of 50 years. Within the dream, Samuel would proffer him a beautifully carved wooden box and say, "Everything thou needest to remember is within, my son. Allow them not to seize it from thee." But when Elias opened the box, it was filled with naught but sand, which trickled through his fingers regardless of how tightly he clenched his fist. He would invariably awaken with a gasp, the scent of dust and ozone within his nostrils, his heart pounding with a nameless dread. This dread was his constant companion, a shadow that clung to him even within the brightest daylight. It was the fear of the void, not his own final, infantile fade into nothingness, that seemed a distant, peaceful prospect, but the void that was gradually consuming his cherished ones. His deepest, most primal fear was not of disappearing, but of forgetting. Specifically, of forgetting Lena. He envisioned a day, 20 years hence, when he would be a boy of 22 and she a young woman of 25. They might pass upon the street, and he would feel a strange pang of something, a fleeting sense of déjà vu, but he would not know her. The architect of his soul, the co-author of his life, would be a stranger. The thought was a physical pain, a cold knot within the pit of his stomach that never fully dissolved. His dream, the secret, foolish hope he harbored within the deepest recess of his heart was the inverse of his fear. He dreamt of a flaw within the system, a loophole, a means to anchor a memory so profoundly that the unwinding could not efface it. He envisioned a method, a technology, a forgotten piece of philosophy that could preserve the core of a person's identity, a single, indelible memory that would survive the journey back to the dawn. A memory of love. If he could but save one moment with Lena, one perfect, crystalline memory, and carry it with him into the great forgetting, then the entire cycle would possess meaning. It was a romantic, impossible notion, the kind of hope that could drive a man mad. This internal conflict, the terror of forgetting versus the desperate hope of remembering, was the engine of his life. It dictated his every action. His meticulous care for Maya was an attempt to honor the memories she was relinquishing. His arguments with Samuel were a desperate plea for the ghost of his father to resurface from within the brash young man. And his work as a memory archivist had become more than a mere job. It was a crusade. He was not merely preserving civic records. He was searching for a clue, a breadcrumb left by some long-faded ancestor who might have felt similarly, who might have discovered an answer. One afternoon, seeking solace from the domestic strife that plagued his life, he delved into the electronic archives. His designated task was the restoration of a compendium of second-cycle journals originating from a coastal settlement, yet his thoughts wandered aimlessly. Yielding to impulse, he executed a search query, a concatenation of keywords he had previously lacked the audacity to combine: memory, preservation, cycle, failure, anomaly. The system hummed audibly. The search was flagged as restricted, resulting in access denied. Such occurrences were not unprecedented. Certain historical documents remained sealed in the interest of societal equilibrium. However, this instance possessed a distinct characteristic. A secondary prompt materialized on his monitor, a rudimentary, text-based interface evocative of antiquity. It stated, "Janus Protocol. Articulate your query's intent." His respiration faltered. The Janus Protocol existed as a mere myth, a cautionary tale among archivists. Legend purported it to be a fail-safe mechanism conceived by the first cyclers, an artificial intelligence entrusted with monitoring the integrity of the world's fundamental programming. Its access had remained dormant for centuries. With a perceptible tremor, Elias inputted, investigating the philosophical and biological limitations of memory degradation during unwinding. He anticipated another rejection. Instead, a solitary file was decrypted and displayed on his screen. It deviated from the format of a journal, presenting itself as a personal log, composed in an austere, clinical style. The author identified herself as Dr. Eristhorne, and the entries dated back to the very genesis of the first cycle. Elias's gaze devoured the text, his pulse accelerating palpably. Log entry 734. The unwinding protocol remains stable. The initial population has arrived and is assimilating into their designated families. The artificially induced retrograde amnesia is exhibiting efficacy. No subjects have demonstrated any recollection of their pre-cycle existence. The Legacy Journal initiative has proven surprisingly effective as a psychosocial anchor. They are constructing their own prisons and designating them as homes. A sensation of unease crept along Elias's spine. Artificially induced retrograde amnesia, pre-cycle existence. These were not the pronouncements of an observer chronicling a natural phenomenon. These were the utterances of an engineer. He continued reading, his apprehension escalating with each successive line. Log entry 735. There is, however, an anomaly. Subject 7, designated Orion, exhibits indications of what we are terming phantom memory resonance. During rapid eye movement sleep, his neural activity mirrors patterns not derived from his fabricated journal, but originating from his pre-cycle life. He articulates a name, Seraphina, that is absent from his assigned history. The associated emotional response is profound: grief, longing. The system was designed to eliminate this, to spare them this. The pain of loss was the very affliction we endeavored to eradicate. Log entry 736. We have resolved against intervention. The resonance is attenuated, manifesting solely within dreams. It poses no credible threat to the stability of the cycle. However, it precipitates a philosophical inquiry that troubles me. We constructed this gilded cage to shield humanity from the lacerating edges of grief and the finality of death. We bestowed upon them a gentle, cyclical trajectory, a life characterized by meticulously orchestrated greetings and prolonged farewells. We designated it as mercy. But if a vestige of a genuine memory can persist through this monumental erasure, a love so potent that it reverberates across the void we engendered, did we truly safeguard them, or did we deprive them of the very essence that defined their humanity? The capacity for profound love, even when it inflicts pain, to remember even when it shatters you. Elias reclined in his chair, his mind reeling from the implications. The world was not a naturally occurring state. The unwinding was not a fundamental law of physics. It was a program, an artificial construct, a gilded cage erected by their forebears to evade pain, grief. They had consciously chosen this path. They had exchanged the chaotic, unpredictable, and agonizing beauty of a linear existence for this regimented, predictable, and sterile repetition. And the great forgetting was not a gradual dissipation. It was a deliberate, systematic obliteration. He recalled his dream, the image of Samuel and the box of sand. Don't let them take it from you. It was not a caution pertaining to time. It was a warning directed at the system itself. He pondered his seemingly unattainable aspiration to preserve a singular memory. Dr. Thorne's log suggested that such an endeavor might not be entirely futile. A love so powerful it echoes. A ghost in the machine. He experienced a surge of an unfamiliar and intense emotion within his chest. It was not dread. It was anger, a profound and righteous indignation. His entire existence, his affection for Lena, his grief over his father's passing, his devotion to his daughter, it was all unfolding on a stage meticulously constructed by others, adhering to a script penned by unknown hands. They were not merely living a falsehood. They were inhabiting one. He surveyed the archive, taking in the endless rows of data stacks containing the chronicles, the exquisite and heart-rending fictions of millions of lives. It was not a repository of fading selves. It was a necropolis of pilfered truths. Each journal served as a headstone for a genuine life that had been expunged, a genuine love that had been consigned to oblivion. He terminated the file, the screen reverting to his customary work interface. However, the world beyond his monitor would forever bear a different complexion. The gentle hum of the city, the joyous sounds of children at play in the park, the deliberate gait of the elderly. It was all integral to the program, a grand, elegant, and utterly monstrous deception. He journeyed home that evening in a daze. He observed Lena in the garden, meticulously tending to the roses that were beginning to bloom. She glanced upward and bestowed upon him a smile, and the purity of that smile, the unwavering affection reflected in her eyes, pierced his heart like a blade. She was complicit in this as well, an unwitting prisoner within the same confines. His apprehension concerning the potential loss of her memory was now eclipsed by a novel and more chilling fear. What if the reverberation of a genuine memory, a phantom resonance, was not a benediction but a malediction? To be the sole individual within a realm of blissful ignorance who retains the memory of a love that no one else acknowledges ever existed? To be tormented by a specter visible only to oneself? He advanced toward her, the setting sun projecting their elongated shadows onto the verdant expanse. He faced a choice. He could conceal this revelation, endure the burden of this terrible knowledge, and shield her from the truth. Alternatively, he could confide in her, thereby risking the utter devastation of their shared world, their love, and everything they held sacred. Upon reaching her, she grasped his hand, her touch as familiar as his own heartbeat. "You appear troubled, my love," she inquired, her voice imbued with concern. He gazed into her eyes, the eyes of the woman he would cherish across the epochs of time and forgetting. The secret lingered on his tongue, a heavy and noxious weight. Could he possibly share this burden? Or would the truth prove to be the one obstacle that their love could not surmount? The weeks that followed Elias's discovery were characterized by silent torment. He navigated his existence as if he were a phantom, the world now perceived in two distinct layers: the tranquil, pastel-hued surface that everyone else beheld, and the somber, turbulent machinery he knew to reside beneath. Every interaction was tainted by this bifurcated perspective. When he assisted Maya with her breakfast, he saw not merely his aging-down daughter, but also a victim of a sweeping, memory-erasing experiment. When he observed Samuel racing away on his motorcycle, he saw not only a reckless youth, but a consciousness deliberately stripped of its hard-earned wisdom. And when he embraced Lena, her warmth and affection felt simultaneously more precious and tragically fragile, akin to a beautiful flower flourishing within a high-tech prison. He opted for silence. The truth constituted a poison, and he could not bring himself to administer it to the individual he cherished most. He rationalized his decision by asserting that he was safeguarding her, yet a darker, more self-serving thought insinuated that he was protecting himself, protecting the fragile illusion of their shared reality, because he was gripped by terror regarding the potential consequences of its disintegration. Consequently, he bore the burden in isolation, and the weight of it began to manifest visibly. He became aloof, consumed by his thoughts. Dark circles formed beneath his eyes. The initial trial originated not from the grand conspiracy, but from the simple, agonizing mechanics of their daily lives. It commenced with a communication from the city enforcers. Samuel had been apprehended. He and his cohorts had commandeered an industrial gravlifter to ascend the facade of the antiquated Zenith Tower, one of the city's tallest structures, in order to witness the sunrise. It was a profoundly foolish and exceedingly perilous act of youthful rebellion. Elias discovered him in a holding cell, appearing less like a defiant insurgent and more like a sullen and frightened adolescent. He was seated on the narrow bench, his head cradled in his hands, his bravado having dissipated. "Are you injured?" was Elias's initial inquiry, his voice taut with a blend of anger and relief. Samuel shook his head, avoiding eye contact. "Kira sprained her wrist. They're releasing us with a fine and community service. They primarily aimed to frighten us." Elias expelled a protracted, deliberate breath. He settled onto the bench, the expanse between them feeling like a mile-wide chasm. "Sam, what possessed you?" "I wasn't thinking," Samuel mumbled. "That was precisely the point. To simply feel something, to cease thinking." He finally raised his gaze, his eyes conveying a sense of pleading. "You don't comprehend, Eli. You're in the optimal position. You possess strength. You retain all your memories. As for me, I'm losing fragments. Daily. Insignificant pieces. The title of a beloved book. The rationale behind our relocation to this residence. It's as if my head is riddled with holes. Consequently, I endeavor to fill them with the present, with noise, with the wind rushing past my face. Anything to avert noticing what is absent." The confession struck Elias with the force of a physical blow. He had been so preoccupied with the man Samuel was evolving into that he had neglected to acknowledge the struggles of the young man he currently was. He was not merely being reckless. He was experiencing profound terror. He was fleeing from the same void that haunted Elias, albeit in a divergent direction. "The man who raised me," Elias began, his voice cracking with emotion, "the man whose memories are fading within you. He possessed courage. However, he was not reckless. His bravery resided in confronting challenges, not evading them. He confronted the grief associated with his wife's fading. He confronted the challenge of raising me as a single parent. He stood his ground. "Well, I'm not him," Samuel exclaimed, leaping to his feet. "I'm not him, Elias. He is a ghost, a story you relentlessly attempt to force me into. I have no recollection of being that man. I do not remember raising you. All I possess is your assertion, and these journals brimming with tales that feel as though they befell someone else. I love you, I know I do. It is a sensation and intuition. However, the history, it is not mine. This body is mine. This moment is mine. And you perpetually endeavor to strip that away from me by transforming me into a memorial for a deceased man. The phrase deceased man lingered in the sterile atmosphere of the cell. In some respects, he was correct. Elias was lamenting a man who was standing directly before him. He was attempting to preserve a specter, and in doing so, he was stifling the living boy. It was a profound failure of love on his behalf, a selfishness engendered by his own bereavement. You are right, Elias conceded, the admission exacting a heavy toll. I am sorry, Sam. I miss him, and I have not been equitable to you. The anger ebbed from Samuel's countenance, supplanted by a weary despondency. I miss him too, he stated quietly, even though I do not know who he was. They journeyed home in silence, a tenuous truce existing between them. Elias paid the fine. He had undergone a trial and recognized his own failing. He had to learn to cherish the son his father had become, not merely the father his son once was. However, the encounter left a profound fissure in his soul. Samuel's cry, "It is like my head is full of holes," was the direct, engineered consequence of the unwinding protocol. The suffering was not a flaw, it was a feature. His anger at the unseen architects of their world solidified into a cold, dense resolve. The second trial was quieter, but it cut even deeper. A few nights later, he was assisting Maya in preparing for bed. She was more lucid than she had been in months, her body's rejuvenation briefly sharpening her mind. She was gazing at an old, physical photograph, a rarity in their digital world. It depicted a stern-looking woman in her late 80s, standing on a windswept beach. I remember her, Maya stated, her voice clear and certain. This was shortly after my arrival. She was the head of integration. Her name was Iona. Elias frowned. Maya, that is not in your journal. Your integration officer was a man named Kale. He had authored that chapter himself. No, Maya insisted, her gaze fixed on the photograph. It was her. She was very strict. She delineated the rules for me. She said that memory is a river, and we must allow it to flow away, or we will drown within it. I never forgot her face. She looked up at Elias, her eyes filled with a strange, fleeting clarity. You are attempting to construct a dam, are you not, Elias? I can discern it in your eyes. Be cautious. The river invariably triumphs. Then, as swiftly as it arrived, the moment of lucidity dissipated. Her eyes clouded over, her focus softened, and she looked back at the photo with a vague, pleasant confusion. What a lovely picture, she murmured. Is she family? Elias stood frozen, the photograph in his hand. Maya possessed a genuine memory, a memory that did not originate from her journal. A phantom resonance, precisely as Dr. Thorne had described. It was a crack in the porcelain facade of her fabricated life. The woman, Iona, had spoken the rules of allowing memory to flow away. Was she merely a standard government employee, or something more? Was she a guardian of a system, a keeper of his secrets? He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. The conspiracy was not merely in ancient, hidden logs. It was here within his own home. Its agents had spoken to his own daughter, and Maya's warning, delivered from a brief island of true memory in a sea of fiction, felt like a direct message. Be cautious. The river invariably triumphs. Was a threat? A piece of advice from someone who knew the truth? He tucked Maya into bed, his hands trembling. He had believed himself to be alone in his knowledge, an isolated observer. But now he felt like a player in a game whose rules he was only just beginning to comprehend. There were others who knew, people who were actively maintaining the lie. They had been close enough to touch his family. He returned to his study, the photograph of Iona clutched in his hand. The two trials of that week had revealed more than merely his own character. They had revealed the nature of his prison. It was not a passive system. It was actively managed. Samuel's suffering was a designed outcome. Maya's true memories were a monitored anomaly. He was not merely fighting against a philosophical concept. He was fighting against a hidden, organized power. His secret was no longer just a burden. It was a danger. If Maya could have a phantom memory, who was to say others could not? What if someone else remembered something more significant? What if the ghosts in the machine started to speak? The people maintaining this system would surely do anything to ensure their silence. He looked at the face of the stern woman in the photograph, her eyes seeming to watch him from across the decades. He had tried to be a passive keeper of a terrible truth, but the world was forcing his hand. He had no more. He had to know who these people were and how deep the deception went. His quiet, internal crusade had just become terrifyingly real. The question was no longer just about memory and love, but about power and control. And as he stared at the woman's face, he had to wonder, was he the hunter, or was he the one being hunted? The face of the woman, named Iona, became Elias's obsession. It was a ghost haunting the edges of his vision, a key to a door he desperately needed to unlock. His work at the Memory Archives transformed from a mournful duty into a feverish investigation. He abandoned the restoration of mundane journals and dove headfirst into the restricted sections, using the Janus protocol access he had discovered as his skeleton key. He cross-referenced arrival records, integration officer assignments, and civic administration rosters from 20 years ago, the time of Maya's arrival. He searched for Iona. He found nothing. Her name did not appear in any official capacity. It was as if she had never existed. This absence was more damning than any record. A person in a position of authority, a head of integration, would leave a vast data trail. Her complete lack of one meant her records had been deliberately and meticulously scrubbed. This was not the work of a simple bureaucrat. This was the work of an organization with immense power and reach, an organization dedicated to maintaining its own invisibility. Frustrated, Elias changed his tactics. He abandoned the direct search for Iona and instead focused on the anomaly she represented, phantom memory resonance. He dug back into Dr. Eris Thorne's logs from the first cycle. He found fragmented, corrupted entries that spoke of a contingency. When the resonance proved more persistent than anticipated, a subgroup was formed. Dr. Thorne had called them the Janus Keepers. Their mandate was twofold: to identify and monitor individuals experiencing resonance, and to reinforce the benevolent narrative, ensuring these memory cracks did not destabilize the system. They were the gardeners of the great lie, pruning away any shoots of truth that threatened to sprout. The logs were ancient and incomplete, but they provided a profile. The keepers were often recruited from families who showed a high degree of cycle compliance. They were true believers, people who saw the unwinding not as a prison, but as a salvation. They saw the truth as a dangerous contagion and themselves as the physicians tasked with containing it. The logs hinted that the keepers passed their knowledge down through generations, not in journals, but through private tutelage when a child had grown young enough to be deemed trustworthy and indoctrinated, usually in their late 40s or early 50s, the age of peak cognitive function and emotional maturity. Elias sat back, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening clarity. The woman Iona was a Janus keeper. Her interaction with Maya was not a standard integration briefing. It was an assessment. She was checking to see if Maya's own phantom memories posed a threat. Her words, "Memory is a river, and we must allow it to flow away, or we will drown within it," was not just a philosophical platitude. It was the core tenet of the Keeper's creed. The revelation was terrifying. This was not a faceless system. It was a conspiracy of people. His neighbors, his colleagues, even his friends could be keepers. He felt a wave of paranoia wash over him. Who could he trust? Every conversation now seemed layered with hidden meaning, every pleasantry a potential test. His gaze fell upon Lena. She had always been a bastion of stability, a firm believer in the grace of the cycle. Her family was old and respected, known for their unwavering civic duty and cycle compliance. Her great-grandfather had been one of the city's founders during the second cycle. The thought was a venomous serpent slithering into the Eden of his mind. so while he immediately tried to crush it. Lena? His Lena? Impossible. She was the most honest, transparent person he had ever known. Their love was built on a foundation of absolute trust. To suspect her was to suspect the very core of his own life. He pushed the thought away, ashamed of his own paranoia. His investigation needed a new direction. If he could not find the keepers, perhaps he could find more of their mistakes, more cracks in the wall. He began cross-referencing civic incident reports, accidents, arrests, psychological episodes, with a search for keywords associated with memory anomalies, déjà vu, phantom limb, unexplained nostalgia, anachronistic knowledge. He spent sleepless nights sifting through mountains of data, his eyes burning from the screen's glow. And then he found it. A pattern. Over the last 100 years, there had been a small but consistent number of cognitive dissonance episodes, CDEs. The official explanation was always stress-induced psychosis related to the pressures of the unwinding. The individuals would profess to recall occurrences that were beyond their comprehension. Innovations from antecedent cycles, individuals absent from their personal journals, and even fragments of linear time, depicting a world where humans aged and succumbed to mortality. In each instance, the individual was discreetly confined to a secure sanatorium situated on the city's distant northern coast, the Stillwater Institute. They were never observed again. Stillwater. It was not a curative facility. It was a penal institution, a destination to which the keepers consigned those individuals whose recollections resonated too powerfully, posing a threat if permitted to reverberate. It served as the repository for the system's inadequacies. A profound apprehension enveloped Elias. Was this the location to which Subject 7, designated Orion, the man who harbored dreams of Seraphina, had been dispatched? Was it inhabited by individuals whose affections had been so profound that their memories had endured the great obliteration, only to face retribution for this tenacity? He was compelled to ascertain the truth. However, Stillwater was an impregnable fortress. Access proved unattainable. He encountered yet another impasse. Defeated, he terminated the files and sought out Lena. He yearned to experience her presence, allowing her steadfast composure to dispel the shadows that were consuming him. He discovered her within their bedroom, seated adjacent to the window, a diminutive, lacquered container resting upon her lap. This was the very box her mother had bestowed upon her prior to her dissipation, a cherished family relic. Elias had invariably presumed it to be merely a repository for adornments. However, Lena's gaze was not directed towards jewelry. She was cradling a minuscule, crystalline data chip, exposing it to the moon's luminescence, her countenance inscrutable. "Lena," he queried, his intonation hesitant. She recoiled, swiftly concealing the chip within the container and securing the lid. Her movements were clandestine, indicative of culpability. "Elias, you startled me." "What is that?" he inquired, his heart initiating a measured, ponderous cadence. "Oh, nothing," she responded, her smile excessively radiant and somewhat artificial. "Merely antiquated family keepsakes. You comprehend. Trivial, sentimental artifacts." However, Elias had discerned the chip. It deviated from the standard issue data slate. It was an antiquated model, characterized by high density and encryption of the type employed for secure archival purposes, the kind he had only encountered within the most profound, most restricted echelons of the city archives. The kind that might conceivably contain, for instance, the authentic chronicle of a lineage of Janus keepers. The despicable, venomous notion he had endeavored to suppress resurfaced with renewed vigor, its fangs penetrating deeply into his psyche. Her family's impeccable cycle compliance, her unwavering conviction in the system, her mother's keepsake box, all these elements converged into a singular, terrifying conclusion. "Lena," he articulated, his voice trembling, the surrounding environment appearing to lisp precariously. "What information is stored on that chip?" She regarded him, and for the first time in their 23 years of companionship, he perceived a stranger. The warmth that had previously characterized her eyes had vanished, substituted by a guarded, sorrowful depth he had never witnessed before. She remained silent. Her response was unnecessary. Her silence constituted an admission. "You know," he whispered, the words possessing the acrid taste of ash. "You've always known." Lena's meticulously crafted demeanor finally disintegrated. A solitary tear etched a course down her cheek, resembling a river carving a ravine through the terrain of their shared existence. "Elias," she initiated, her voice a fragile whisper, "I sought to safeguard you." "Safeguard me," he choked out, a mordant, hysterical guffaw effervescing within his throat. "Safeguard me from what? The veracity? My own existence? Our shared existence? Lena, has it all been a fabrication?" The concealed truth had been unveiled, not discovered within a dusty archive, but revealed within the tear-streaked visage of the woman he cherished. The ultimate revelation pertained not to the world at large, but rather to his personal sanctuary. The guardian of the most profound secret was not a shadowy operative in the distance, but the individual who shared his bed each night. He had been endeavoring to identify the fissures within the world's foundation, only to unearth the most substantial one bisecting the very core of his marital union. And he was compelled to contemplate, as he fixed his gaze upon the woman who functioned both as his wife and his warden, what additional secrets she concealed within that diminutive, lacquered container. The silence that descended between them was not devoid of substance. It was dense and suffocating, burdened by the weight of 23 years of unspoken truths. The familiar solace of their bedroom felt alien, the moonlight projecting acute, unfamiliar shadows. Elias scrutinized Lena, endeavoring to reconcile the woman he had adored, the woman with whom he had constructed a life, with the unfamiliar figure seated before him, the custodian of a world-altering secret. It resembled simultaneously examining a photograph and its corresponding negative. "Ow!" Elias ultimately managed to utter, his voice a raw, shattered entity. "How could you withhold this from me?" Lena recoiled as if physically assaulted. She clutched the lacquered container to her bosom, employing it as a shield. "My mother imparted this to me when I reached the age of 50, she disclosed, her voice subdued and strained. Precisely as her mother had informed her. "It constitutes our family's burden, our duty. We are Janus keepers." The appellation, pronounced aloud within their bedroom, possessed the resonance of profanity. "Duty?" Elias spat the term. "Do you characterize it as a duty to perpetuate a falsehood? To observe individuals living, loving, and suffering within a cage, yet remaining passive? To permit them to forget their authentic selves? What constitutes a true self, Elias?" Lena retorted, a flicker of vehemence illuminating her tear-filled eyes. She ascended to her feet, her composure restored, having been forged within the crucible of a lifetime of secrecy. "Is it the self that is conceived, deteriorates, and perishes in terror of the abyss? The self that is ravaged by disease and torn asunder by abrupt, inconsequential loss? Our forebears experienced that existence. They referred to it as linear. They witnessed the demise of their progeny, the withering of their progenitors. They existed under the perpetual, oppressive tyranny of an irreversible timeline. They possessed knowledge, undeniably, but it was a knowledge steeped in anguish and the certainty of oblivion." She gestured emphatically around the confines of the room, encompassing the city that extended beyond the window. They engineered the unwinding as an act of compassion. They elected a gentle decline over a violent termination. They opted for the tranquility of oblivion over the agony of recollecting a lifetime of affliction. "We do not perpetuate a falsehood, Elias. We preserve a mercy, a terrible, unbearable mercy." Her expressions constituted a deluge, a dam of conviction giving way. She genuinely believed it. Every utterance. She was not a monstrous entity. She was a zealot, a fervent adherent to the benevolent narrative. "Mercy," Elias responded with incredulity. "Do you characterize what Samuel is enduring as mercy? The terror of his mind disintegrating? Do you characterize our ministrations to Maya, tending to her as one would a fading plant, as mercy? We function as professional mourners for the living. Lena, it constitutes a protracted, drawn-out torment. It constitutes a slow, managed farewell, she insisted, her voice ascending in volume. It represents a world devoid of orphans, a world wherein you have the opportunity to observe your parents in their youth and vigor once more, wherein you have the privilege of caring for your offspring as they discover vitality. Can you not perceive the beauty inherent in the symmetry? The affection. I perceive the beauty we engender, Elias countered, his voice trembling with a frigid fury. The affection we infuse into the fissures of this fractured system. That beauty is intrinsically ours, Lena, not the system's. The system is what ultimately appropriates it all. It is a thief that pilfers everything, and you function as one of its sentinels. The accusation lingered in the atmosphere, acute and glittering. The act of betrayal transcended mere secrecy. It encompassed a fundamental, irreconcilable disparity in their respective worldviews. He perceived a prison. She perceived a sanctuary. He perceived stolen recollections. She perceived liberation from suffering. What about Stillwater Institute? He pressed, his voice diminishing to a perilous whisper. Does that constitute a component of the mercy as well? Confining individuals because their memories resonate too powerfully? Because their affection for someone in a pre-cycle existence was so profound that your impeccable system proved incapable of obliterating it. Lena's countenance paled. The vehemence in her eyes dissipated, replaced by a profound, haunted sorrow. We lack the autonomy to choose, she whispered. Resonance functions akin to a virus. Should it proliferate, should individuals commence to believe in the existence of a world predating this one, a genuine existence that was expropriated from them, the existential despondency would shatter our civilization. It would constitute a psychological plague. The tranquility would be disrupted. Stillwater serves as a quarantine. It represents the price of serenity for the multitude. The frigid, clinical rationale underpinning it induced a sensation of nausea in Elias. The cost of tranquility. The sacrifice of the few for the solace of the masses. He reflected upon Dr. Thorne's log, upon Orion, and his affection for Seraphina. He was not a systemic anomaly. He was a sacrifice. So you were cognizant, Elias articulated, the realization dawning with a sickening finality. Each instance I returned home, tormented by my occupation, by the fading recollections. Each instance I spoke of my apprehension of forgetting you. You were cognizant that it was all by design. You observed my suffering, and you maintained silence. This constituted the core of the betrayal. Not the cosmic falsehood, but the intimate one. The exchanged glances, the comforting utterances, the nights spent embracing each other. All of it was now tainted. He had been navigating a tempestuous sea, and she, his guiding beacon, had possessed knowledge of the course all along, yet had elected to observe his struggle against the tumultuous waves. I acted thusly out of affection for you, she pleaded, tears now flowing freely. The veracity would have annihilated you, Elias. I perceived it. I perceive it now. It constitutes a knowledge that isolates. It transforms the world into a nightmare. I desire to spare you that experience. I desired us to have our allotted time, our exquisite, impeccable time beneath the sun's radiance, prior to the forgetting. I desired you to experience serenity. I harbor no desire for serenity, he roared, the sound tearing from his throat, raw and replete with anguish. I desire veracity. I desire an authentic existence, characterized by genuine affection and genuine suffering. I desire the entitlement to my personal recollections, rather than the curated fictions that you and your keepers spoon-feed us. You did not safeguard me, Lena. You ensnared me. You rendered my existence, our shared existence, a falsehood. He retreated from her, stumbling in the direction of the doorway. He could no longer breathe within that confined space. The air was saturated with her terrible mercy. He observed the lacquered container upon the floor, where she had inadvertently dropped it. Contained within it was the chronicle of their division, the evidence of the chasm that had just manifested between them. "Elias, please," she implored, extending her hand towards him. "Do not do this. Where will you go?" He gazed upon her, the woman who occupied the very epicenter of his existence, and experienced an ache so profound it resembled the amputation of a fragment of his soul. "I don't know," he responded, his voice devoid of resonance. "But I cannot remain here.